This is Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne, the podcast where successful people share what they do to thrive under pressure. Hello again. You're listening to Series 3, Episode 3 of Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne, founder of Coaching Impact and author of The Shed Method. Now, as you know in this podcast, I try to get under the skin of that thing we call pressure. What does it do to us? How can we harness it and make it work for us instead of against us? You know, occasionally there comes along a conversation that makes you want to bottle it and keep it in your pocket, ready for those moments when life feels just too much. Well, this is one of those conversations. When I reached out to Claire Danson, I already knew her remarkable story of her life-changing accident and becoming a GB paracyclist. But what I didn't expect was for her to share, for the first time publicly I understand, her teenage battle with an eating disorder. The trust she placed in our conversation moved me deeply. From her teenage years, grappling with perfectionism, to her journey through life-altering injury, she offers insights that apply to any of us facing pressure, whether it's in the boardroom, at home, or in those quiet moments when we're wrestling with our own expectations.
The pressure has to be important to you. It has to be a you pressure. It can't be a somebody else pressure. It can't be a pressure of someone else thinks I ought to do this, so I ought to do it. Because you won't have the desire to apply yourself to that pressure. It could become very toxic and you won't get any joy from it. That's what I really learnt through that whole experience. The time that I began to deal with pressure well was when it was pressure that I chose for myself.
Claire Danson began long-distance running aged 17, before discovering her passion for cycling and swimming, which led her to take on triathlons. A highly successful GB age group triathlete, Claire achieved significant accolades, including becoming the European age group champion in 2019, winning the London Triathlon and triumphing at Staffordshire Ironman 70.3. Her ultimate goal was to earn her long-distance professional racing licence. However, in August 2019, Claire's life changed forever when an accident left her with catastrophic injuries. Her resilience and positive mindset carried her through the toughest challenges, transforming her from an elite triathlete to an inspiring para-athlete. The journey you're about to listen to is a testament to unparalleled mental and physical resilience. Claire shows us how the human spirit can triumph in the face of unimaginable adversity. In our conversation, she opens up with experiences that she rarely discusses, which I feel very honoured about. She offers up gems about everything from how to deal with toxic nature of those should pressures to why she never makes a decision just before bed. We talk about celebrating small wins, advocating for yourself, and why sometimes the kindest thing you can do is take the pressure off someone else. I feel genuinely privileged to have had this conversation with Claire, and I hope you'll find something valuable in it too. It's so good to have you on, Claire. Thank you for joining me to have this conversation about Better Under Pressure.
No worries. Thank you so much for asking me to come on. I feel very honoured.
Good. Well, I'm really intrigued about this conversation because I was thinking, Claire, people would probably look at your life and think, well, she must be a queen of pressure. She must have it absolutely down and understand, you know, what she does with it and how to use it. So should we start there? Like, what is your relationship with pressure?
So I'd say that I probably do now have quite a good relationship with it to a certain extent. I mean, I don't think, no matter how it looks on the outside, I suspect no one has the best relationship with pressure. We all feel it, even, you know, CEOs of big companies and things, they'll all feel pressure. And that uncomfortableness that invariably comes with it. But throughout my life, and I've learned my ways of dealing with pressure when it's put on me. And I think learning those things now enables me to deal with anything that life throws at me to that extent.
Yeah. I think it's interesting you use the phrase learning how to deal with it, because I think that is what it is, isn't it? It's like, how does it show up for you?
Yeah.
And B, when it does show up, how am I going to get the best from it?
Yeah, definitely.
So how have
Um,
you learnt to do that?
I think from a young age, I have felt pressure. And I have my earliest memory of feeling an uncomfortable amount of pressure came when I was revising for exams at school, and it was year 8. So they were not important exams. They were just at the end of the year. What can you remember? It really didn't mean anything. In hindsight, to me at the time, they meant a lot, and it was very important that I did well in them to me. And I was in the garden, and the way I used to revise was I would make those note cards and then I'd learn them. And my sister was testing me. I remember getting really upset, an irrational amount of upset, because I couldn't recite what was written on the cards word for word. And when I say I couldn't recite them, I knew all the important information. I knew everything she was testing on me, but I would miss out the words like the and, or I'd say it in the wrong order to what I'd written. And to me, that meant I was going to fail my exams. So I think at that point, my relationship with pressure was actually that was unhealthy because it was making me quite irrational. And I think that pressure came very much from a fear of failing and a desire to always be better. And in my case, not even just being better, but being the best. I found it very difficult if I wasn't at the top of the class or didn't get the highest marks. And that was what I was striving for. And that pressure was very much self-inflicted. Nobody around me ever said, we want you to get the best grades. We want you to be in all the A teams at school in sport. We want you to be the best at playing a musical instrument or anything like that. My parents were great in that they gave me all the opportunities with no pressure. But somewhere inside me, I wanted to be the best. And actually, having that very negative relationship with pressure did lead me down a very toxic path when I was a teenager. I developed a very significant eating disorder. And I'm not sitting here telling you that pressure was the reason I developed an eating disorder, because I think that eating disorders are highly complex. And in many situations, as with many mental health problems, the root of them is very difficult to uncover and potentially not possible to uncover. But for me, I think that amount of pressure that I put on myself was toxic and was probably part of what led me down that path. The eating disorder I had was severe enough that I had to be admitted to an eating disorder unit, and I was there for 6 months. It wasn't a healthy 6 months either. It wasn't a case of going there and recovering and then going home and being well again. Actually, whilst I was there, in some respects, the pressure, the unhealthy pressure mounted because I was around many other young people with eating disorders. Disorders thrive on competition. So everyone was trying to be the most ill. And so I now had this pressure from my eating disorder that was louder than any other pressure of wanting to get better, that was telling me I had to be, in inverted commas, the best at being ill. So I still had this very unhealthy pressure now being put on me by still something within me, but this unhealthy eating disorder part of me. And after 6 months, they discharged me, much to my parents' horror, who knew I wasn't better. When I left hospital, I was just so focused still on trying to lose weight, trying to, satisfy this pressure that was being put on me by my eating disorder. But I wasn't completely unaware of everyone around me. I was aware that there was still this pressure and this desire that obviously my parents wanted for me to get better. And it all became too much for me. And when you spoke to Simon a few episodes ago, he spoke about lethal pressure, about deciding is the pressure lethal or non-lethal, and if it's non-lethal, what's the worst that can happen? For me, the pressure became lethal. It was something that I could not cope with, and in the end, I actually made an attempt on my own life. It was significant, and I didn't have the ability to deal with it at that point in my life. obviously I survived, and I'm very thankful that I did. And I think it's important to point out that it actually, for me, it wasn't me saying I wanted my life to end. It was me saying I can't cope. I really need help. And I didn't know how to do it, but I
Mm.
knew I couldn't cope with the situation that I was in. I did manage what I knew I needed. So it did give me what I needed, because suddenly the help that wasn't there medically was put in place. So obviously I was taken to hospital and they would not let me leave hospital at that point. From the general hospital, they put me back in an eating disorder unit. And this time there was a change in me and I wanted to get better. The pressure was I want to be the best at being well. So something happened in me that made that pressure become a positive thing. It didn't mean it was easy. The pressure isn't necessarily something that's easy to deal with. And there was still this negative pressure from my eating disorder telling me it was wrong and it didn't want me to do it. But something more inside me wanted to get better. And I did, and I went home and I went back to school. And by this point, I've missed a year of school. So there was
Right.
added pressure going back because I'd missed so much. I was going back in year 10, so I'd missed quite a lot of the GCSE courses. And we spoke to my school and they said to me, you can drop down to the year below. I was adamant I wasn't going to do that. So we took the pressure off. And for the first time in my life, I was accepting doing something that was right for me but felt uncomfortable. So I only took 6 GCSEs. And for me, the person that wants to be the best, the person that always wants to be doing better than everyone else, doing 6 when all my friends were doing 10 was hard.
Mm-hmm.
But I was making the right choice for me for what I could deal with. And expecting myself to catch up on 10 subjects rather than 6 was a big ask. I did get 6 A stars in those subjects. And then I went on and I took 4 A levels rather than 3, and I got 4 A's at A level. And the reason I'm talking to you about this is because whilst my relationship with my eating disorder and the pressure from that had improved and I was able to channel the pressure into being positive pressure, what I didn't realize at the time was that I still hadn't really fixed that relationship with pressure. And the reason for that was because the pressure that I was putting on myself was still not pressure that I was really choosing, because the pressure came from what I felt I should be doing and ought to be doing, not what I wanted to do. And I was clever. I was able to work hard. So I put those two things together and thought, well, I should be doing something, again, in inverting commas, clever. And so I took all the sciences and the maths and I decided to do a chemistry degree at Bath University. And that wasn't really what I wanted, but it was what I felt I ought to do. And all that happened was I went to university, this pressure of doing something that I didn't really want to and still wanting to be the best, but now it being a step up, so it was harder, all became too much. I had a relapse
Mm-hmm.
into my eating disorder, and I really struggled whilst I was there. And actually, it brings me on to something else that I've learned about pressure. Because whilst I was there, it was Christmas and my sister phoned me and I was clearly very unhappy. And my parents had been to see me and they'd seen I was getting really ill again. She phoned me and she said, "What are you doing there? You don't like it, do you?" And I was like, "Well, no, but I can't leave." And she was like, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, because, everyone is expecting me to stay and I just can't do that." And she didn't give me a choice. She said, "I'm coming to get you tomorrow." And she must have been, what, 21? She wasn't that old. Said, "I'm coming to get you tomorrow." She borrowed my parents' car and she came to pick me up. She took me to see my tutors and she said, go and speak to them and tell them you're leaving. Don't tell them you want time off, tell them you're leaving." And that was big. But actually what Alex did was she took all the pressure off me.
Mm.
So in a situation where I clearly wasn't dealing with things very well, she took the pressure away. And there are times in life where you
Mm.
have to accept that help and not see it as a failure. And I
Mm.
think that is our problem. So many times accepting help is seen as failing, but
Mm.
actually I think accepting help is a massive strength if we can bring ourselves to do it. I did go home, but it was sort of too late for my eating disorder at that point. I did actually continue to head in a downward spiral, and it led me to a second I guess, lethal pressure moment. This time my eating disorder had taken me so far down the road that, again, and I spent a night that I remember in hospital where I nearly didn't survive, and that was just pure malnutrition, I guess. But I did, and again, it lit something inside me. Okay, I'm gonna fight this properly this time. And I did, and I was in hospital, and I went home. And the difference this time when I went home was that every pressure that was put onto me was my own choice. So I went home and I thought, what do I really want to do? And this time, there wasn't, the pressure had been taken away. I wasn't going back to Bath. So it was like a new start where I could really choose for myself. And I wanted to teach. And really, if I think about it, it's what I'd always wanted to do. So I reapplied to university. I chose Winchester University because also I never really wanted to go away from home. But the pressure was, oh, it's university. Everyone goes away at university. They have the best time. I've got to go because that's what everyone does. And everyone will think I'm really weird if I don't go. But the truth was I didn't want to go away from home. I wanted to stay at home and I wanted to do this teaching degree. And I did it. And I got my first class honours. So I was still able to satisfy that desire in me to do well, but it's doing well at what I wanted to do. And it enabled my life to have this whole new balance because I could do my teaching degree. And I also discovered triathlon, which I loved. And I had the time and the energy to do that. Yes, triathlon put pressure on me because I was competing in events and I got into GB age group racing. So I still had pressure, but the difference was it was pressure I had chosen. And so it was pressure that I could deal with. I think that's probably my biggest thing that I've learned over the years is that the pressure has to be important to you. It has to be a you pressure. It can't be a somebody else pressure. It can't be a pressure of someone else thinks I ought to do this, so I ought to do it. Because you won't have the desire to apply yourself to that pressure. It could become very toxic and you won't get any joy from it. That's what I really learnt through that whole experience. The time that I began to deal with pressure well was when it was pressure that I chose for myself, not pressure of I ought to do this or I should do that or I think they want me to do this.
Wow, there's so much I want to pick up on in what Claire's just shared. But for now, I want to focus on a couple of her insights. She's making a crucial distinction between pressure we choose and pressure we inherit. The shoulds and oughts that often come from others or that we believe others expect of us. When we take on shoulds and oughts, we should take that role or I ought to handle something in a particular way. It can quickly turn into negative pressure or distress. I love how she words it. Is it a me pressure or a someone else pressure? When we take ownership, we oddly gain more choice. When it's ours to own, we can make it a positive pressure. And when we do that, we can tap into a different kind of energy. We saw this in Claire's shift from studying chemistry because she ought to pursuing teaching because she wanted to. The outcome was completely different. The other thing that Claire said, which really landed with me, was when she said, someone else's pressure on top of my own is almost too much. I really, really relate to that. And so many people that I work with too. Because Claire had taken on what she thought she ought to do, the pressure at Bath University became too much. At a crucial moment, her sister Alex actively chose to take the pressure off. She saw that any more in Claire's system would take her down a very, very unhealthy and familiar path. By saying, I'm coming to get you tomorrow, Alex released Claire from the pressure to decide. It can be tricky to know the right moment to lift the pressure off someone, whether you're a parent, a leader or a friend, but sometimes being better under pressure comes from being released from it, relinquishing decision making and leaving it to someone else. Last week, actually, a leader said to me that when she was asked by her partner when she got home where she'd like to go for dinner, she nearly lost it. And she said because she had no capacity to make any more decisions. Having her family tell her where to go and when was the biggest gift at the end of a full-on day. How often do we recognise that moment in others and pick up the pressure? Or on the flip side, how often do we actually share that we're feeling under pressure and ask for help? We tend to see asking for help as not being able to cope. Or maybe that's just me. Claire's story suggests it might be one of the most important skills we can develop. that relief from unhelpful pressure. It's not about avoiding pressure altogether. It's about making sure that the pressure that we're under is pressure we've chosen, pressure that matters to us, and knowing when we need to share that load and call on support to let it go. There were a couple of moments in that story that you shared there where it felt, as a sort of listener to it, that there was a moment early on in the first occurrence of your eating disorder and you went into hospital when you chose something, when you chose to be the best at getting better as opposed to choosing to be the best to be ill.
Yeah.
That felt like a pivot moment, that something had come from, you called it a spark from within. Do you recognize that spark from within now, like as you've grown older and with other pressures that have come in your life? Do you recognize what that spark looks like and feels like for you?
I think so. I think there is an ingrown determination in me, but I also think it's that desire to do things that are hard. So I still have that desire and that excitement that it ignites in me at what opportunities will it give me now? If I can overcome this, what is this going to lead to? Just a determination to achieve things as well. That is still there. That pressure to try and achieve and is still there. And I think a challenge, that's probably what it is. Challenges ignite a spark in me. Okay. Doing things that people think you can't do does still ignite. So there is still an element of external people's views, but I can now use them in a positive way. And I suppose when I chose to get better, you are actually often told with an eating disorder, particularly if you've had it for a while, you'll always have it. It'll always be there. You'll learn to deal with it, but you will always have it. And I mean, I think that's a really negative thing to be told. And it is often told to you by professionals. And in fact, when I probably had my eating disorder for 10 years. And if you spoke to any medical professional, they'd be very surprised that I have actually made a completely full recovery. I do not have any issues with food whatsoever. For a while I did. For a while I, avoid chips, avoid cake. Everyone that knows me now will know that I don't do those things. And in fact, there'll be people listening to this that this probably comes as quite a surprise that it was such a big part of my life, because it won't be what they see in me. Back then, I suppose there was that element of no one is expecting this from me, and maybe that takes the pressure off as well. No one's expecting it, so I can do it with no pressure.
Okay.
And also show people what I'm capable of.
Yeah. I'm really, really intrigued with this sense of external pressure versus your own choice of pressure. I mean, this has come up a lot in conversations on the podcast, actually, but I think you're giving it a different flavor here in a way, which is making me think of how some people do push and find out their limit or push their limit because somebody has asked them to do something that they have felt they can't do. And they've talked about that as a positive thing, right? It's having an external ask of themselves. And they thought, I can't do that. And they've had, in a way, faith in them to do it. So they've risen to that occasion. Yeah. This is slightly different. This feels like when you own the choice, there's something about you owning it. Yeah. As opposed to somebody else telling you, or actually shocking people's expectations. That's what I'm hearing about that first one. Like everyone expects you to go back and potentially get into the same trap, wanting to be the best at being ill, but actually you chose something different from yourself.
I think it probably does fulfill that desire in me to please people as well, and for people to look at me and be like, wow, didn't she do great? Yeah. I mean, it almost sounds bad in my head that I want and need external validation, but the truth is I like it. And I suspect most people, if they want to be truly honest, do quite enjoy that, oh, you did that really well. Because who doesn't like a little bit of praise where it's deserved? I don't like people just to say, oh, aren't you amazing, just for doing something that isn't. So for me, we haven't spoken about it, but I'm a wheelchair user, full time. I'm paralyzed. We'll probably get onto that. But somebody coming up to me in the supermarket and saying, "Oh, isn't it amazing that you're out?" doesn't fill me with joy. No. No. Because that's quite a normal thing. Somebody that comes up to me and says, "Oh, I follow you on Instagram. I think, what you're doing with your life or what you're promoting or what you post on there is amazing." That fills me with pride and joy because I'm making a difference doing those things. I'm not making a difference to anyone going out to the supermarket. So yeah, there's a difference in those things. I think I've gone off the track of your question again.
You haven't really. It's just talking about those pivotal moments in the story that you've just
Yeah.
shared for the first part of your life
Mm.
around when pressure turns into something that you owned rather than you felt like
Yeah.
it was somebody's external demand
Yeah.
of you.
Yeah, and I think for me, and everyone is very different. I agree with you that some people need a little bit of pressure put on them. But I think because I put so much pressure on
Mm.
myself, actually external pressure is what tips the balance for me.
Mm.
Someone else's pressure on top of my own is almost too much.
Yeah.
And my mind works in a way where it will then go into overdrive because if I fail that person, if I don't do it and I fail that person, to me, that is devastating and
Yeah.
really hard to deal with. I can now deal with that, but it's something that I find very, very hard. Any sort of pressure I have, it is much better to come from myself because then the only person that I'm letting down is me. And that might still feel quite unhealthy, but actually, I can also deal with letting down me now. I've learned how to,
Yeah.
or I've
Yeah.
learned how to, rather than deal with letting myself down, reframe it. So if I've got some pressure or some goal that I've made or that I've made for myself and I don't quite make it, that's okay because I can think of it very differently. And I think, well, I might have set this goal out to begin with. I didn't meet that goal, but on the way, what did I achieve? And there's so much in that. Or what have I
Mm.
learned? What have I
Mm.
learned from not quite getting there, but what have I learned that's going to help me the next time? So it's still quite a healthy relationship in that way.
Yeah. How did
Um,
you learn that though?
I think if I look at my life, um, it's very easy to look at all the things that in my words, no one else's, I feel I've done wrong. But it that to see those, I have to look back and think about it. Whereas I've not explained this very well, but when I look back at my life without thinking about things I've potentially failed on or whatever, I see so much positive.
Yeah.
And I don't know where that's come from, but I find it very easy to recall things I've done well and happy times and good things than I do to remember bad things. I have to be consciously thinking what's gone wrong
Gosh,
a
that's
lot of the
amazing,
time.
Claire.
Um,
I don't think many people could say that actually, that you are now much more able to focus on the things that have gone well. I think that's an incredible skill.
I suspect it's because inadvertently there has been a lot of hard in my life.
Maybe.
So I
Yeah.
suspect what's really happened is I am determined
Mm.
to get all I can out of life in a positive way and to try and think of everything as much as I possibly can now, rather than what went wrong or what might go wrong. What are the opportunities? What went right? What have I learnt? Because that will help me so much more than thinking, oh, wasn't it awful that I had an eating disorder? Didn't that take away so much of my life? Isn't it awful that I'm paralyzed? Oh, poor me. Well, it's
Mm.
not really gonna get me anywhere positive. Where if I'm thinking, well, what can I still do? What doors has it now opened? I'm gonna have such a better life for it. And the truth is, no one knows, no one knows what's around the corner.
No.
So all you can really do is enjoy the moment and look back at things you've enjoyed and remember good times because you don't know what's happening tomorrow.
No.
And with that in mind, you've just got to enjoy what you have as much as you can.
Yes. I so agree with you. I'm hearing from this conversation and from others, and what I'm trying to do sometimes in my own life is to be very deliberate about that focus as well.
Mm.
Maybe this is a good time to think about what now, what happened, what has happened, because ultimately what intrigued me, I didn't actually know about that first part of your story,
Mm.
Claire. That wasn't
Yeah.
the reason I reached out to you. And that's made it even more interesting
Mhm.
because I think as you go on to your next, what's happened next,
Yeah,
it felt and feels like that has what you've just shared has got a huge significance to play in the way you've dealt with this bit.
definitely. So yeah, you're right. So as we've kind of already touched on, I got my life back together and it was fantastic. I'd discovered the sport of triathlon and I've made just the best circle of friends from it. Friends who I have now and who have helped me in life so much since then. And we are so close. And I discovered with triathlon that first of all, I discovered age group racing, and then I realized I was quite good at it. And in 2019, I became European champion at age group racing. And I decided that I'd really like to try and get my professional race license at long distance racing. So at half Ironman distance. And that was kind of my goal for 2019. And to do that, you have to do well at certain races. And I'd had 3 booked in. And the first one was in Zell am See in the summer of 2019. So the day before I was due to fly out, I went on a kind of routine training ride. It was just a very easy spin, kind of turning my legs over because I was going to be flying the next day.
Mm.
And it really was just an ordinary day. I swam in the morning and then I went home, saw my mum, had breakfast, set off on my ride. The day was anything but ordinary. It was actually the day that changed my life more than anyone ever thinks their life is going to change. So I rode around a corner at the same time as a tractor came around the corner, and the tractor went into me. And I obviously suffered very severe injuries. I basically broke everything in my upper body. So I broke all my ribs, wrists, shoulder blades, top of my right shoulder. I broke my neck in several places. I broke my back in multiple places. I punctured both my lungs. But the most serious injury, I suppose, was that I suffered a complete sever to my spinal cord, which has left me paralyzed from the chest down. But as life-changing as that was, I still look back at it and I feel exceptionally lucky for so many reasons. But the initial reason is how lucky I am to be here, because by all kind of rights, I probably shouldn't have survived an accident like that. And there were lots of incredibly fortunate circumstances that led from the moment that I was hit. The first one is that the kind of first person on the scene other than the tractor driver was a retired anaesthetist, also happened to be a family friend. So I was best friends with his daughter since we were babies. So I think that served me in 2 ways. One was obviously his medical expertise, and the second was it's a friendly face, somebody that you know, which I believe makes a big difference. But what he also did was call the air ambulance. And with an accident like mine, the speed at which they can get you to hospital is, second to none. And actually, the land ambulance wouldn't have taken me to Southampton, which is a trauma centre, which is where I needed to be. The air ambulance could take me straight there. They also can provide you with treatment that land ambulances can't. So they transfuse blood on the way, and gave me, I think, medication that can't be given in an ambulance. So I was really, really lucky. I said I broke my neck. Well, if I'd had spinal cord damage in my neck, then there's potential that I wouldn't have use of my arms. So there really was lots of very fortunate things surrounding the initial accident itself. And then since then, I've gone on to live a really full and really wonderful life. And again, I've got my life in a place where I've chosen what it looks like. And I've chosen this, to my way of thinking, this wonderful life that I'm extremely privileged to have. And I think everything that I went through as a teenager, as a young adult, really fed into how I dealt with my injury. Because it is life-changing. There is no doubt about that. I can sit here and make it sound all roses and, oh, I dealt with it so well and it was easy and, oh, wasn't I wonderful and happy every day? And of course I wasn't. It was horrific. It was life-changing. It was so hard. There are days where you wake up and you just think, how am I going to get through this? I can't do anything for myself. How do I go from literally somebody dressing me, somebody, sitting me up, putting me in my chair, how do I go from someone doing every single thing of my day for me to becoming independent? And it's scary.
Mm.
But the way you do it is you show up every day and you do what you can and you learn and you just don't stop until
Yeah.
you can. And I can now.
Yes. You just don't stop until you can. That reminds me, I mean, actually, you said something pretty amazing, I think, on the first, was it like the first day of your, what did you,
Yeah.
what did you say? Because this is what really inspired me, Claire, to be honest, was what you said.
Yeah, so my first conscious memory. So I mean, I'm sure I rambled a lot on before, but um, when I got to Southampton, I was awake. Apparently, I don't remember any of that, but they quite quickly put me on a ventilator because I wasn't getting enough oxygen in. So the ventilator just breathes for you. And when they put you on a ventilator, you tend to be asleep for most of that time as well. But you wake up every so often. And when I woke up, they gave me this letterboard to communicate with, and you point to the letters to spell out words because you can't talk when you're on a ventilator. But even at that point, I couldn't use my hands at all because they were so damaged. So what we did instead was my family would point along the letters, and when they got to the right letter, I just squeezed their finger.
Mm-hmm.
And I spelt out, so they gave me this board, and I spelt out two words. The second word is the more important one. The first word was sorry. I was just very aware of how worried they would be. But the second word is the one that you're thinking about, and it's the more important one in this conversation. The second word was para-athlete. So it was at a time where the doctors had told my family they didn't know if I would make it. Obviously, I didn't know they'd told my family that.
Mm.
But I had this absolute awareness that it was a really serious situation. I knew I was paralyzed. I don't remember being told that, but I knew.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I couldn't move anything at that moment in time. But I also knew that this wasn't going to stop me from doing anything that I loved. And I loved sport. So I knew I was going to get back to it some way, somehow. I would be back there. And it was also my way of letting everyone know it was going to be okay. You
Yeah.
know, I'm still Claire. I'm still going to do sport. It's going to be okay. And this is our goal. I'm going to be a para athlete.
And you fundamentally believed that at that time.
Yeah. And the whole way through my rehab, that was all I had on my mind. And actually, so my right arm was really damaged. They actually think the tractor might have run over my right arm.
Right.
So I broke the head of my humerus. The muscle was pulled off my arm. My wrist was in pieces. So the surgeon spoke to me afterwards and he said, there were so many pieces, I had to use two plates. I've never had to do that before. So it was in a really bad way. I couldn't move it for a long time. And in fact, it was in such a bad way that, and my surgeon, who was amazing and knew I wanted to do sport, had rung ahead to the spinal unit, which I was where I was going to next, and had said she needs specialist physio on her arm. And actually, at Salisbury, which is where the spinal unit was, they have a specialist upper limb physio rehab facility. So he arranged for me to go there, and I pretty much went 4 or 5 days a week to there. Anyway, I go there for the first time, and I meet this amazing physio called Fiona, and we're writing down what my goals are. And she's writing them because I can't write. But she says, "What's your goals?" And I said, "Oh, I want to compete at triathlon again." And she writes down, "Do a triathlon or to take part in a triathlon." And I said, "No, I want you to write compete." And she said to me, since then, not at the time, she did as I asked, wrote down compete. And she said, um, afterwards, she said, I was a bit shocked and I thought this lady's a bit crazy, like that's never going to happen. But I wrote it down anyway. And she said, within a week of knowing you, I understood why you insisted that I write that down. And I believed it, and she believed it as well. Um,
What did she see in that week, do you think?
what did she see? Probably me turning up every day, probably me being very open and talking about the challenges I was facing and talking about what I wanted. And probably as she was pulling my arm all over the place, making it hurt, me saying, yeah, it's fine. And I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
she knew it really hurt.
Yeah.
Um, so she just probably saw that I would do anything and everything, and I was there and I was doing every exercise as much, as she told me. And I suspect she just continued to see that. We worked together for 5 months and she was amazing. Um,
You see, I mean, this is what's so fascinating about your story. It's easy to listen to this and think, well, gosh, most of us, the majority of us at the moment, anyway, listening to this probably are thinking, God, that's an incredible. You've had some really incredible experiences that the majority of people don't get one of those, maybe even, but to have two of those experiences. And it's easy to listen to something like this, Claire, and think, well, what's the relevance? But I think there's so much application in this.
yeah,
And just in that, what you've just said there is I turned up and I asked for what I want.
yeah.
I mean, how many of us do that
And it's something that's
consistently?
so important. Yeah, I agree. I do tell my story and sometimes tell it in, workspaces and things. And there's so much relevance because, like you've just picked up on, I turned up and I said what I wanted. We
Yeah.
find that
Yeah.
so hard, because for some reason it's really difficult to say, actually, I want this, because we have some fear of what will people think of me, or, I should just sit back. But actually, I was doing no harm. And we're often doing no harm in telling people what we want. And if we don't tell people, they won't know.
Mm.
And it's something that I've really learned. Self-advocacy is so important. I and often when you have a disability or a chronic illness, it becomes 10 times more important. So I had a pressure sore just before Christmas. It was the first one I'd had. And I obviously, so for someone with a spinal injury, pressure sores can be really, really serious. And basically, the treatment is you have to take pressure off. And mine was on my sacrum, which is basically where you sit. So
Yeah.
that meant for me, I needed to be on bed rest. Obviously, treatment is going to be different if you are someone that can stand, because if you're standing, you're not putting pressure on it and that sort of thing. Anyway, I knew that. I knew from what I remember from the spinal unit, I was supposed to call a district nurse so they could see it, dress it, look after it, help me with it. So I did that. And the district nurse came round and she said, oh, it's fine. It's really not that bad. You can sit in your chair. It won't make a difference. You'll be fine. And my mum, the district nurse went, and I did question the district nurse, and she was adamant that it was fine. And she went, and my mum goes to me, "Oh, that's amazing. You can sit in your chair." And I was like, "No, mum,
Mm.
absolutely not. I know that that's not the treatment that I need." So I called the spinal unit, and they asked me to send a photo. And then the feedback that I got from them was, "You absolutely mustn't get out, sit down, sit on it at all. You need to be on full bed rest, which means 24 hours of the day. You will need a new cushion. You need to speak to a dietitian. You need a new cushion for your chair." They gave me, and you'll always be vulnerable. That will always be vulnerable. Like, it was like doom and gloom. So I had like one person making
Yeah.
me feel like I was a hypochondriac, and the other one telling me my life would never be the same again. So in that situation, it was really important that I took responsibility for
Yeah.
myself. And so I did the research. I've got plenty of people in wheelchairs who I could, in wheelchairs that are friends, that I could ask for their advice, been in wheelchairs longer than me, so have more of an understanding of what to do in these situations. And I was really disciplined. So I didn't get out of bed, even though that was really hard.
I
I
bet.
stayed in bed for, I think it was like 5 weeks. No, I stayed in full bed rest for 3 weeks, and then I started to get up very slowly for like an hour a day and then 2 hours a day. But full bed rest for 3 weeks, which is really hard. And I discovered a treatment that's not available on the NHS called Capsule. And I bought it, and when the district nurses came around, I said, I don't want you to touch the wound. They had to help me with elements of like self-care, because I was on bed rest, so there were things I needed help with.
Mm.
But I said, I don't want you to touch the wound. I'm treating it. And that was hard because they are the professionals, but I was in full belief that what they wanted to do would not help me. And that got my wound pretty much healed in 3 weeks. And even the nurses said, when they stopped coming, said to me, gosh, I wish all our patients with pressure sores would heal like that. That's incredible. And I'd been disciplined, I'd done my research, and I'd advocated for myself and done what I knew was right. And it would have been so easy to have felt a bit bad about saying, no, I don't think you're right, to someone who's professional, and just gone along with it because I didn't want to offend anyone. But it wouldn't have been right for me.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have to just be brave when we know. It's not about being, arrogant and saying I know best. I had done the research. I'd asked so many people that I was confident. And then you've got that backing, if you like, and go for it.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I said to myself, well, I'm not going to see these people again if I annoy them. That's, but they weren't annoyed either. They could see, oh, you are making the right decision. This is healing really well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm hearing in there also a real, and this sort of is a thread I'm hearing throughout the whole of your story, is the relationship with yourself. I mean, you call it self-advocacy, but it's also listening inwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is even harder when you've got people that on paper look like they know more or should know more, or in an organization are maybe in a different role, or you're reporting into them, or or whatever hierarchical structure exists for you. There's that. And the other thing I'm hearing, Claire, is which is something that I'm talking a lot more about, is this combination of spirit and discipline.
Yeah.
That, the spirit of you to be able to, day 2 or week 1 after your accident, to be able to articulate via a board Paralympics, like to be that's a spirit. And it obviously was the spirit that the woman who worked with you for 5 months picked up and felt from you after a week, right? But that to me is the spirit. And then there's the discipline that you're talking about, which is you do the work every day. You do what you can every day. It's incredible. And it's really inspiring. And I think there's so much to extract from it in terms of whatever pressure anyone who's listening to this might be experiencing, and turning a pressure into something that is really hopeful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you say like this, like internal self kind of talk and discipline and things, and I think it's something that everyone can relate to. Sometimes we have that very negative discussion with ourselves, and it's very easy to look at what you can't do. And I found that in hospital, and that's where this is what I'm trying to get at, is it is relatable, because in hospital I went from being European champion to being able to do nothing. So for example, as I mentioned it earlier, I couldn't get myself dressed. And the first day that I didn't, one day I could put my socks on myself, one day I could put my shirt on myself. And then the first day that I decided I was going to try and get myself dressed completely independently, it took me an hour and a half. And that's a really long time. And I could have looked at that and I could have been really negative. I could have absolutely berated myself and been like, look how useless you are. It's taking an hour and a half to get dressed. You used to run triathlons and win, and now you can't even get yourself dressed in a normal amount of time. But I remember calling my sister and being like, you'll never guess what I did today. I dressed myself. Like, it's such a seemingly little, ridiculous, if you look at it in the light of day, thing to be excited about being able to get yourself dressed. But in that moment, for me, it was massive. And there were, as I say, there were those two ways to look at it. I could look at it as how useless am I, or what a massive achievement.
Yeah.
And the whole way through my rehab, I could tell you so many things that I did that we celebrated because they were big steps for me.
Yeah.
And it's that like step process. And people sometimes are so focused on the goal, they forget to see how amazingly they're doing on the way. And actually, if you can do that on the way, it will give you that oomph, or that like motivation to keep going. If you're kind of down here and your goal is up there and you're just thinking, God, there's so far to go, I can't possibly make it, it's really demotivating. Whereas if you can say to yourself, well, the next thing to achieve is that, on my
Yeah.
goal, celebrate it. What's the next thing? Celebrate it. What's the next thing?
Yeah.
It's just a much, you're more likely to get there, I think.
Yes.
Um, and there's also that thing of, um, for me, we're all capable of so much more than we give ourselves credit for.
Mhm.
And again, it's that voice inside you where you think, oh, maybe I want to run a 10K race. And then that voice goes, oh no, maybe no, you might not do it. No, no, don't. Best not to try because what if you fail? Or there's that promotion at work that I really want to go for. Oh, but what if I don't get it? No, okay, no, I'm happy. I'll just stay where I am. Whereas if we could have that voice of, okay, yeah, I'm going to try. You know, what's the worst that can happen? I'm going to try for that promotion. I'm going to, I don't know, speak to that person that I've never spoken to before, or I'm going to enter that race,
Mm.
thinking to ourselves, what's the worst that can happen? Generally, we'll achieve so much more than we even think is possible. But you've got to be willing to put yourself in a slightly uncomfortable position where maybe it won't work out and feel a little bit uncomfortable to achieve things and then be that much further forward. And I talk about extending your comfort zone. So if you put yourself outside your comfort zone a little bit, then all that happens is you step outside, you feel uncomfortable, you become comfortable. Now your comfort zone's bigger. So then the next time you can do something that's even more outside, achieve that, extend your comfort zone again. And it just opens up opportunities that you might never have had if you weren't willing to feel a little bit uncomfortable for a little bit of time.
Yes. And I'm also hearing that's how you've drilled focusing on what's working and the
Yeah.
things to celebrate. Like I can absolutely hear it in the way you're talking now, that's why you can look back and just see and celebrate the things that are worth shining a light on as opposed
Yeah.
to not.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I think so. There's, life is short. There's no point in dwelling on the rubbish things because you can remember happy times and good things and use that to drive yourself forward because you know that more will come. Yeah, more difficult times will probably happen as well, but you know you've dealt with them in the past, so you
Yeah.
know you can deal with whatever comes in the future, um,
Yeah. So,
alongside all the good
I
stuff.
mean, I'm tempted to say to you, what is your goal now, Claire?
I mean, life for me is such that I'm really fortunate. I'm in a really good place. And, my goals had once pretty much always focused around sport, um, setting up a good job for myself and that kind of thing, which is many people's goals. Um, but actually, I think my biggest goal is probably more vague, and it's probably just to live live my best life, as we all say, and however that ends up looking, it's it's putting myself in, giving myself opportunities, saying yes to everything. It's for me sharing my story and trying to help as many people as I can because I think there's so much in that. I think we
Mhm.
have so much in the world. For me, there's so much in the world that people look at and worry about that are, I talk about it with my mum. I say, when she's stressed about something, I'm like, Mum, that's a non-problem. And it sounds horrible, but we think about it and she's like, oh yeah, it's not really an issue, is it? It's not that big a deal. And then she's not worried about it anymore. I'm going off track a little bit again.
No, I love that.
But it's how can I live the best life possible, the happiest life possible? How can I also make the best life possible for my loved ones and my friends and my family? And how can I help as many people, as many other people as possible? Alongside that, I do still have goals in sport. I cycle for Great Britain, so I want to do that for as long as I possibly can. That will inevitably come to an end at some point. And then the next thing will be, well, what challenge do I want to do next? There'll always be a sporting goal, but that will
Mm.
change as life changes.
Mm.
But the end goal, amongst everything I do, is take all the opportunities that I can, live life to its fullest, because, we don't know what's around the corner. we really, in my case, don't know what's around a corner. That
Mm.
accident with that tractor could have been very different. Um, so it's about enjoying things as best as I possibly can in the time that I have, um, and make the life the best I possibly can with the people around me. It's vague, but it's so important.
Vague would be the last word I'd use to describe the way Claire is talking right now. In fact, there are many specific, practical nuggets of gold that can help all of us choose how we want to respond, like the value in recognising a non-problem. I'm definitely taking that. The importance of advocating for yourself by asking for what you want, and the power of celebration, however small the win. But for me, the power of hearing Claire say in such a simple, matter-of-fact way, after all that's happened to her, that her main goal is to take all the opportunities she can to live her fullest life because you never know what's around the corner, is the bit that I want to reflect on here. That phrase, you never know what's around the corner, one we often use so flippantly, now has a whole new potency for me as a consequence of this conversation. That corner on her bike, on that ordinary day, the one where she was crushed by the tractor, literally changed everything in an instant. When Claire referred to it as an ordinary day, I was reminded of the documentary interview with the daughter of Gisèle Pellicot, the French woman drugged and raped multiple times. She said that on an ordinary Monday at 8 o'clock, her life stopped as she discovered what her father had done. We have moments in our own lives where everything shifts, different types of corners. Some we see coming, others blindside us completely. They might not be as traumatic as Claire's accident, but they're there. The unexpected redundancy, the project that fails, the relationship that ends, the opportunity we didn't see coming. We all face these corners, some gentle bends, others hairpin turns. There is so much to take from this in the way that she has navigated hers. Before her accident, she'd already faced significant corners. Her battle with an eating disorder, leaving university when it wasn't right for her. But each time she found a way to turn what could have been a dead end into a new direction. The power of that moment when she's lying in hospital, unable to move or speak, and she spells out para-athlete on a letterboard. While others might still be processing the corner, she's already mapping out the new route. Not denying the challenge, not minimising the struggles, but actively choosing a new direction. And pulling others in to dream big with her and to help her achieve it. I think there's so much in this for all of us. When we hit those corners in our lives, the unexpected ones that throw us off course, we also have the capacity to learn to pause and ask, if this is my corner, what's my new direction? Because maybe that's what resilience really looks like. Not bouncing back to where we were, but finding the courage to take a new direction when life turns a corner for us.
I haven't mentioned much, and I should have done, about the people around me, because it's an important, they're a very important part of my whole story. There is nothing that I could have done in my life without my family and my friends. You know, when I was in hospital as a teenager with an eating disorder, truthfully, eating disorders can make you I'm going to talk about myself and how I felt about myself, or I feel about myself in that time. It made me quite a horrible, selfish person. And it wasn't me. And I'm I'm happy that it wasn't me, it wasn't a choice. But I behaved in ways that it would have been very easy for my family to have been like, we've had enough, we're not going to support you anymore, we're going to put you in the hospital and they can deal with you. And they didn't. They visited me every day, no matter how I was behaving or being because of my illness. And they stuck by me. And I wouldn't have got through that without their support. And then they were there when I was ready for the help. So when I decided I want to get better, and it was still hard, they were there and they took me through. And it was exactly the same when at every moment in between, but specifically when I had my accident. My friends and my family were there all the time. They came to visit me in hospital. There wasn't a single day when I was in hospital that there wasn't people with me, supporting me, doing my rehab with me, just being there. And it's very relevant to pressure as well. I think I said I gave you the example of my sister taking the pressure away from me.
Yeah.
I think if you're feeling under an immense amount of pressure, sometimes the best thing you can do is talk to someone and delegate. If it's too much, what can someone around you do to help? And we often feel asking someone to help us is a burden on them. If you think back to when someone last asked you to help them, you probably didn't think, oh, that's such a burden. You probably thought, you probably felt really good to be able to help someone. I feel really good if I can help someone. I very rarely think, oh, I really don't want to help that person. You generally feel quite good about yourself in that moment in time. So actually, it's probably one of the kindest things you can do to someone, particularly if it's something that isn't actually that stressful for them. It's great. It gives them that hit of, I feel great about myself. Didn't really have to do anything too hard, but it's really helped that person.
Yeah. Win-win.
Yeah, win-win,
Yeah.
exactly. So sometimes being able to relieve pressure by asking for help is really, really important. And I never used to be very good at asking for help, but I have become very good at it. Not in an unreasonable way. But if I need to talk to someone, I have the people around me. Obviously, I don't, ask random strangers unless I'm in the supermarket and can't reach our top shelf. But I have the people around me that I know I can go to, and they know they can come to me. And I think that's really important for everyone to try and build, if it is at all possible, that support network around you, because it really makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, I usually finish this podcast asking if there were two pay forwards, Claire. I feel like you've given us a mountain of pay forwards in that. But if you had to lay your money against two important ones, what would they be?
I think I would, first of all, if it's to do with pressure, I think I'd say ask yourself, is this a me pressure, or is this an I should, I ought to pressure? If it's a me pressure, then the way you deal with that will probably come on to my second one. If it's an I should or an I ought to pressure, think how important is it to you? It probably isn't if it's an I should or an I ought to. So if it is one of those, think about, okay, what do I want to change to make it a me pressure? Because if it's an I should or an I ought to pressure, I don't believe it will ever end well. I think it will feel awful. I think even if you get rid of the pressure, it's not going to give you the satisfaction that you should get from achieving something that is high pressure. It's probably just going to make you feel drained and not great about yourself. So I think that is the first thing. Ask yourself, it's a bit like, is it a problem or a non-problem? If it's a non-problem, as soon as you realize that, you'll feel better about yourself. Okay, it's not really a problem. I can worry about something that is a problem. Is it a me pressure or a someone else pressure? If it's a someone else pressure, then I can focus on a me pressure instead. Probably the first one.
Yes.
There's two that in
Competing.
trying to balance.
I'll let you
here.
have two if you want to.
Thank you.
You can have three altogether.
The other one kind of links into if it's a me pressure. If it's a me pressure and it's really, really difficult, that's when you want to look at your team around you and think, who is best to help me with this pressure if I'm really struggling? So that kind of links in with that one.
Yeah.
The second one is one that I've not really spoken about, but I think it's really important. A rule I have with myself is I will never make a decision before I go to bed because I'm tired, my brain's not working properly. I'm just not in the best place to make a decision. And for me, decision making is a very pressured moment. I find decision making very hard and it feels very stressful and I feel under a lot of pressure. And so my rule is I don't do anything like that before I go to bed. And I wake up in the morning and suddenly the light comes and I know exactly what I need to do. So my other one would be don't make any decisions or try and deal with any pressure just before bed. And linked in with that is sometimes if I'm hungry, I can't make decisions. I don't really feel hunger, and I don't know if that's to do with having my eating disorder or whether that's to do, and maybe that's a long-term effect, or whether that's to do with where my paralysis is. I don't feel hunger, but I feel tiredness. My brain's not working. I'm foggy. And all of this links into your shed. Sleep, hydration, exercise, diet. Now, exercise isn't an issue for me.
No.
Hydration, I'm very good at. Diet, I am usually very good at, but I get those telltale signs. And the sleep is the one that's really important. So, I'm not saying this in a very succinct way, but if you've got a high pressure something and you're not sure how to deal with it, sleep, go to bed. And you might just find that when you wake up in the morning, you get that eureka. Oh my goodness, I'm feeling so much better. I know I'm now so much better equipped to deal with whatever this pressure is.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's a lot of increasing neuroscience, isn't there, around what your brain does with that problem when you go to bed with it. You know, you almost switch off and let it get on with it, chew it over, work it out. And then in the morning, okay, it's gone through quite a few filters and it's come out.
I so believe in that, because so often I will just say, I feel so worried, I'm so stressed, I just can't think about it now. I've got to go to bed. And then I wake up in the morning and I just know what to do. So that would be, if it's really stressing you out, which I know can be hard, put it on a shelf, go to sleep, take it back take it back off the shelf in the morning.
Yeah. Claire, thank you so much. It's been hugely moving, insightful, and terribly inspiring listening to you. And I'm really grateful for your time in sharing it with us.
Thank you. It's actually, and thank you. Genuinely thank you, because I'm not very analytical. I've never sort of thought about it deeply, and I've never really shared my experiences of being a teenager, but it's really given me an opportunity to kind of look at it in a really helpful way, and hopefully it will help someone else as well. So thank you.
I think it's a hugely rich story for all of us, actually. And if it's helped you connect the dots, then I'd love to hear you speak about it more and more, Claire, because there's a lot for us to learn from it. Thank you
so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne Rowe. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and let us know what you found useful or what you'd like to know more about. And don't forget, if you'd like to sign up for our fortnightly Pressure Points newsletter, where I summarise key points from each conversation, you can find a link at saramilnerowe.com. If you're interested in any of the practices mentioned, check out my book, The Shed Method. Alternatively, you can find us at Coaching Impact or me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Better Under Pressure was produced by the fab team at Smart Cookie Media. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.